All right, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. This is Floyd. How you doing, Floyd?
What's up? I'm good. I'm getting in the season. I got myself a beer and just gonna have a pretty smooth show.
Yeah, well, smooth, smooth. If you can keep it that way. I mean, it's only one beer up, but we are ramping up
Don't
to
worry,
the.
I've got a second one.
Oh, okay, sweet. You might get more conversational as the show goes on. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, it is a couple of days till Christmas, so understandably that we found it a little bit slow in new things happening. I think everyone's kind of taking it easy a little bit just before the Christmas break, which isn't always the case, but it seems to be the case this time. Just before we get into the stuff we want to talk about today, I wanted to say anyone who does follow us and watch our podcast or show or listen or wherever you do, feel free to like, subscribe, follow in any of the areas that you do. We appreciate it. Helps to grow the show. So if you don't already, give us a like, give us a review. Tell us what you think. Leave us a comment.
yeah.
That it's always a lot more fun when people are talking to us and we can sort of see what the listeners are actually thinking rather than sometimes just speaking into the abyss. Although, I mean, I do like the sound of my voice, so I have no problem
That's
speaking
why
into the
we're on
abyss
the
as
show.
well.
Yeah, but one of the things, man, is it's hard to get negative feedback. So just railroad the show so we know what to improve and what to do better. I mean, I find that the hardest thing is just people to be like, yeah, this sucks. So, if there's something wrong with it, then
Just
tell us.
tell us why we suck.
Yeah. And in multiple comments as well.
And like the show anyway, just for the algorithm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and then you can tell us why we suck more often. Because
Mm,
otherwise we'll just, I mean, if we're not here, we're not doing this. There's no one to
yeah.
yell at. So
Yeah.
anyway. And then you can say you were our first hater. That's a
Yes.
or among our
Yes.
first haters, and that's
Yeah.
always fun.
Yeah.
Now the first story, which may get us some hate, I hope it doesn't, but is very speculative. So I'm gonna start by
Mhm.
um, just putting that out there. It is very speculative, and the reason that I do want to talk about it anyway, though, is because it is, I think, one, super interesting, and two, I think plausible. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. In fact, I think the likelihood is that it probably won't, but I think it's plausible. I think there's a path to this happening, and I think that alone is worth speculating and talking about. And that is so this kind of breaking tweet that came out a week or two ago from the Independent 6 News Australia, which are kind of like these young journalisty kid type things that have actually been correct quite a lot with their scoops, and they seem to have some sources that are very reliable. They've been very reliable over the last couple of years, and they've come out with this kind of breaking scoop that several sources. So this was the tweet. It went a bit viral. Several sources within the Victorian Labor Party report Dan Andrews' name is being floated as a potential candidate for the federal seat of Dunkley. By-election will be held in the seat in 2024 after the death of MP Peter Murphy. So we already knew that Dunkley was going to have a by-election, and I mean, we are tied to death of by-elections. We've had so many of them. But the big scoop here is that Dan Andrews' name is being floated. And this is, several sources within the Victorian Labor Party. Now, take that as you will, whether you trust this or not. But the fact that, this idea, once it kind of broke ground, I found it very, very believable. And for a few reasons, I'll let us know what you think first, Floyd, but then I'll go into why I think this is believable.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen a lot about this. I've kind of been disconnected from the political world. So I mean, I think a Telegram article about it because I'm cool. I go on Telegram. Um, I don't know. I don't know. The thing I've heard about it is that he's going to use this to try and launch himself as the PM. If he runs, he gets elected federally. Albanese, he's pretty lackluster type of guy. Didn't get what he want through with the voice, and it might just be Dan Andrew comes on board. People supposedly love this dude for whatever reason, and so yeah, he might be the one to jump up and be the next PM. Hopefully not, but I could definitely see him do it because he's a bit of a sly rat. in that he might not, say these things publicly. Well, I'm just resigning, and now I can go into federal politics, and I can be the next shining star in the Labor Party. So I could see it happening. I'm not sure if it will, but yeah, I guess we'll find out. As we said, it's just a few sources in the Labor Party, and trust that as you will.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so there's kind of three main reasons why I think this is plausible, and so the first is, you're right, Albanese Labor are largely floundering, more so than I ever expected they would. I thought after the last sort of federal and state elections, I thought the Liberals were so useless that Labor were just going to have a prolonged period of control, and people, the voting public didn't seem to be responding to the cost of living by voting out a left-wing government. They seem to be responding by wanting more welfare and that sort of thing. That seems to have turned a little bit. The conversation around that, the conversation around spending seems to have turned a little bit. So Labor aren't in control of that. And also the huge fumble of the Indigenous voice to Parliament, pushing it the way that they did, and it didn't go through. Labor are a little bit floundering. Albanese isn't particularly charismatic or well liked. He did throw a lot of his eggs in that basket there with the voice. Now, Dan Andrews, on the other hand, now we know that this sort of anti-lockdown, anti-mandate, libertarian, pro-freedom, pro-individual rights movement, especially in Victoria, hates the guy, hates him to death. But we also have to be conscious of the fact that we are not the majority. We are a very small minority, a minority so small that, in fact, was not even able to swing the state away from Labor at the Victorian state elections to simply not Dan. We couldn't even make it not Dan at the last state election. So there is that fact that Dan Andrews does have this aura of invincibility. The fact that he resigned on his own terms, I think, is very important. I don't know that he predicted this sort of, well, I mean, obviously he couldn't have predicted the death of Peter Murphy. He couldn't have predicted the by-election. I don't think he predicted that when he resigned. I think he did resign because he was going to have to be a more tighten the purse kind of premier if he was going to continue, and that went completely against everything he'd said and done, and it would have even involved having to admit a lot of things that he'd failed over the management of COVID and that sort of thing. And I think that was not something he was willing to do. He is very egotistical. We know that. We saw that when he was appearing every single day during COVID, during the lockdowns, 2-3 hours in front of a camera, spotlight on himself, relishing in that,
and ruining North Face as a brand.
Well, probably increasing their sales, to be honest.
Yeah, but for me anyway,
yeah, so corrupting the social image of North Face.
Yeah, I threw out my bum bag, and I've still got like this $400 jacket. I'm like, oh, do I want to wear this? Of course I'm going to wear it, but still, I kind of feel a bit dirty with my North Face.
Yeah. Well, you probably do look a little bit dirty now. I can't unsee that, those images of him, on the podium. So the ego is definitely there. To want to take up this mantle. Now, the timing's perfect. The timing is, if he were to take the federal seat of Dunkley, gives him a year in federal parliament before the next federal election. Labor, we know, has a history of throwing the current leader under the bus just before an election. If anyone who remembers the whole Rudd-Gillard-Rudd saga, they went back and forth, the double backstab. So I don't think there's any that as a party they'd have any qualms with doing that sort of thing to make it Dan who is in the driver's seat. And so the first reason, what my reason? The first reason is that the timing is very opportune. Second reason, Dan seems to be Dan seems to be the kind of person who would relish this opportunity. And the third reason is he did a podcast very randomly, like a couple of days, and I'm my failure. I have not got the name of the podcast right in front of me, but it was like a small kind of semi-independent, left-leaning Labor-esque podcast. Just a couple of days before this news broke, and it seemed really random. It was kind of like, why is he hasn't really spoken to any media, large or small, since resigning. It seemed like a really odd choice for him to do this podcast, and I think he tells his story, shares some of his views, that kind of thing. And it was pointed out to me after this news broke that there's a very good likelihood that that was done for sort of internal politics reasons, like kind of, hey, here I am, look, remember me, this is what I think, these are the people who I align with. If you're thinking about someone, I'm still around, don't forget that I
float
still
the
exist.
idea of Dictator Dan.
Yeah, exactly. And so that is kind of the third reason why I think it is possible. And I think it also I don't think I think it's also likely because it is realistic. It's not like if he were to run in Dunkley, I think he would win. Almost certainly. Because I mean, Victoria is his state. It's this unique, weird, cool idea that kind of gets people excited, both against him and for him. I think this idea of, hey, look, Dan's back. Remember Dan? Now he's going to fix the country. The way he fixed Victoria, saved us, got over it, handed it on. So he's not a dictator because look, he even passed it on. And now he's back to save, and he can save the whole country because Albo's not all that competent. I think it's a very attractive kind of story. It's like this. It's certainly sparks the interest of your kind of independent voter, which is enough to, I think, it win in Dunkley. And Dunkley's not a safe Labor seat, I don't think. But there's also incredible goodwill, I think, by all accounts. What's her name? Peta Murphy, the lady who died of cancer to give up the seat, was very well liked, and there's almost certainly going to be a sympathy vote in her favor for Dunkley. So that could kind of eclipse any
continue
distaste.
her legacy, type of thing, and
it can eclipse the distaste for Dan Andrews that might exist. So Dan would almost certainly win in Dunkley, I think, and I mean, the next federal election is pretty much a I don't know, 50-50, if that. Maybe Labor is even more likely to win than Liberals. So it's not unrealistic. I think if Dan were to go down this path, there would be at least a 50 to 60% probability that Dan Andrews would be the Prime Minister, which is a scary thought. Now, it still is more unlikely that this doesn't eventuate than that it does, simply because there's kind of not enough information yet to say with certainty that Dan is even considering this. But with the snippets of stuff that we know, there is a chance. And look, in a month's time, Labor might pre-select someone else, and we were completely wrong, and we'll never talk about it again. And we may never have to talk about Dan Andrews again, which would be lovely. But if we were right, I'd like to get it on record now
and become some sort of bureaucrat or like Labor leader and still get kicked out of golf clubs.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing, right? He got kicked out of the golf club. He resigned in kind of anonymity, and I don't know that any of that has gone down particularly well on a personal level for him. Well, the golf clubs wouldn't let him back.
The Portsea Golf Club, I mean, it's Portsea. It's a very affluent area, number one. I saw a lot of people come back after that and say, like, well, the Portsea Golf Club shouldn't have done this. They were in the wrong. They can't, he shouldn't be held accountable for what he did as a premier. They're all being dickheads. But at the same time, it does show you there is some sort of negative sentiment to the point of we don't even want to see this guy. And I'm looking at the seat of Dunkley now. I saw the map. I mean, it does cover Frankston. It goes down to the Mornington Peninsula there. But we'll see if he does come on board and what people say. I mean, my big question is, would Ian Cook come and run and just be like, let's get third time's a charm?
No, I don't think so. I think Ian Cook has said he's not going to run again. Also, Mulgrave and what was the other one? What was the... Because it was Mulgrave. Oh, did he just run for Mulgrave twice? Yeah, he just ran for Mulgrave twice. Yeah. I think Mulgrave must be his area. Yep. So to go Dunkley is shifting.
Okay.
And he said he's not going to run again. I think, like, he did really well for an independent, but he didn't come close to winning either of the times. Like, it was never, actually...
Preferences. The preferences to get through.
Yeah, it never looked like it was in doubt. I think it was kind of both times it was interesting to see that he was the second runner-up instead of the Liberals.
Yeah.
but still a distant second. Like it was
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
not
Kind of
going
that,
to.
almost like how like the Lib Dems back when they were called that, and for some people UAP were like the hope of the federal election, and you kind of put that hope in, it didn't kind of manifest, and it's like, oh well, like that sucks.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, the I remember the whole with them, the UAP and the Lib Dems and One Nation and whatnot, and it was kind of like everyone was saying, hey, we shouldn't fracture the vote because only united. You should kind of join into one party and just
Yeah.
go with that. And even still, it would have been like 20 to 25% of the vote
Yeah.
in any seat. So like it's still not nowhere near close enough.
Yeah.
Like it's interesting to see that it's such a large subsection of society, but still not close enough to win. I think Mulgrave in both cases would still be called a safe Labor seat. So I mean, it's kind of on a hope and a prayer that Ian Cook thing. I don't think Ian Cook would run again against Dan. But yeah, that's kind of the reasons I think it is plausible. The other thing to consider is that if it is plausible, is it actually? I actually think there's a reasonable argument to be made that it would actually be a good thing if Dan Andrews ran in Dunkley.
Okay.
Not because the outcomes of Dan Andrews are good. I think the outcomes of Dan Andrews are horrible.
Yeah.
But like with every moment of sort of these galvanizing characters or these galvanizing events, such as Dan Andrews lockdowns, Dan Andrews mandates, the resistance kind of finds a point to rally. And I think like the Libertarian Party, formerly the Lib Dems, certainly grew enormously during COVID and the lockdowns, and grew out of being the opposition to Dan Andrews, David Limbrick and Tim Quilty being the unofficial opposition to Dan Andrews in Parliament. And that, I think, helps. So Albanese isn't quite as on the nose. They're still doing, like broadly, they're still doing all the same expansion of the state, devaluing of the money supply, expansion of bureaucracies and public sector at the detriment of the private sector. But because he's not quite as hated, we're not seeing the same growth. And so I think if someone like Dan did the surprise thing and ran in Dunkley, and did the surprise thing after winning Dunkley and running for PM, that would certainly reawaken a lot of the furor that exists against Dan Andrews. So I think it could be good for the Libertarian Party in a roundabout way if Dan Andrews were to run and if Dan Andrews were to go for this thing. The other thing to think about is that nothing but hatred for the way he conducted himself during COVID, the way he would lie repeatedly and maliciously and viciously about a section of society, which included myself. So nothing but hatred for him. I am not at all satisfied with the downfall of Dan Andrews.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not satisfied with him quietly resigning with his dignity under the guise that, I've had my time. Now it's time for, a younger, fresher face. And he's largely like, I know there were those celebrations out the front of Parliament when he resigned. He doesn't give a fuck. Like he is as content as anything I would imagine.
Yeah.
And I remember one thing that kept me going during the lockdowns and mandates and stuff was the thought that I really wanted Dan Andrews to not be able to sleep at night. I was wishing mental illness upon him for the horrors. And I think if there was to be a return and runs in Dunkley, or if there were to be something like this, it does create the opportunity for an actual rejection of Dan Andrews, which we haven't seen yet. Let's say he runs in Dunkley, and I've said I think it's more likely that he wins, but it creates the opportunity for him losing. If he wins Dunkley and runs federally, I think there's a good 50% chance that he wins, but it creates the opportunity for him to lose and to fail massively, and to finally we can have this repudiation of Dan Andrews, which I don't know, maybe it's selfish of me, but I still feel like I want.
Another thing as well, I mean, this could rally support behind the Liberals, and this could be like their coming back moment where like they're running against Dan Andrews, they bolster up all this support from other people, and it's like if they win, then everyone has to look at the Liberals again and say, shit, are they coming back? So this
Mm.
could be their point if he does run, for them to say, all right, cool, this is our time, let's go for it, and let's do this to relaunch the party. I don't know. Are they that strategic? Is that even a good thing to consider? I don't know. I'm not a big political strategist, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the Liberals responded to it.
Yeah, I mean, and look, the Libertarian Party, which I would much rather win instead of the Liberals, have positioned themselves perfectly for this, because there is the unofficial opposition to Dan Andrews in Victoria. Hey, it creates the opportunity for them to get a senator up or something, something that would help the party and help the voice of libertarianism, which is even more important than the party, onto a national stage immensely. I mean, I would take a Dan Andrews government with one, or even the dream of two libertarian senators. Imagine that. I'd take that in a heartbeat, as opposed to a liberal government. Like, who cares if it's a liberal government? If anything, there is the argument, same with Albo, that it's worse because it's kind of seen to not be as bad. So but it does all the exact same stuff, maybe at a slower pace, but it's just as bad in the real battle, which is between the authority of the state and the rights of the individual.
I get,
And
I mean, I get that point, but at the same time, that's still a smaller scale kind of opposition. I get what you're saying, where the Liberals aren't really opposition, but at least something to kind of, at least something greater, so something to kind of ride the coattails on, or something, or at least launch, like, hey, here's the Liberal Party, here's the Libertarian Party, or another party, whatever kind of party. This is, the Liberals are pivoting this way, we're pivoting this way. What's the better option? Okay, I think, I'd like to think people say, oh, that's the better option. But I think just anything that builds momentum against, because you say fractionalization of the worker and of parliament, and make everything a bit more crazier. That's what I want. I don't really care who's in. Let's just make it kind of seem like the farce that it is.
the accelerationist point of view. Let's get
There
the
we
hell
go.
in a handbasket a bit quicker, so I
Yeah.
can see what comes after it. Yeah, and there is that, certainly. And look, that would kind of, to my point before, is there is the advantage of this galvanizing figure of Dan Andrews. You kind of need one of these galvanizing events for there to be an enormous growth in the popularity of libertarianism. Look at Argentina; they
Yeah.
needed hyperinflation
Yeah.
to get to the point where they've literally elected a libertarian. Look at the US. They've needed the destruction of their currency and a billion foreign wars before there are even people like Ramaswamy who are genuinely being considered, or Ron Paul back in 2012, 2008. ACT in New Zealand, the Libertarian Party there, they lived through Ardern. Like their growth came from this period of lockdowns and of tyranny, similar to Dan Andrews, that Ardern did. You could argue they did a much better job of marketing themselves, because they've actually got some access to the reins of power by forming the coalition government with the centre right party there. So I mean, yeah, this idea that the status quo and this kind of business as normal actually hurts the possibility of exploding in terms of libertarianism. You almost need a crisis. You almost need a crisis, or, as I said, a galvanizing figure that you can rally against, an enemy, a common enemy, which is,
And
I think Dan Andrews could absolutely be that.
I don't know if I'm just in a echo chamber or anything, but it seems like people are more aware, especially after COVID, after a major crisis. People are more politically aware. I don't know how much that is, but at least taking note of like what's going on. Especially when you see a lot of like the election figures that came out, where you had people legitimately considering other options for it. So if that happens, are people going to, with a bit more of a political mind, say, hey, I'm going to consider something different now, or I'm going to go and I'm going to take a bit more notice? I think, though, thinking about it, that didn't really happen for the Victorian election, though. So.
Yeah, I think. Look, I think we are in a bit of an echo chamber. The question is, like, I've been parts of like friendship groups with the opposite echo chamber. So I do go into like echo chambers on the opposite side every now and again and hear what they're saying. And largely what I see from that is they're completely saying the exact same thing, the exact things that you think they would be saying. There's right-wing cookers and whatnot, and trust the government, and they did the right thing, and you guys were kind of weird during that whole period, and let's not talk about it, let's all be friends again. But there is the opposite echo chamber is not has not been critically thought about the events that have just transpired. Our echo chambers, we talk about this sort of stuff because we were the ones who turned against it at the time. The question, I don't think, is whether the two echo chambers have turned in any way. It's trying to figure out whether that broader cross section of the public is looking at things differently, and it's so hard to do on an anecdotal level.
Can you come into our echo chamber type of thing?
So I think the only way you can kind of test the waters on that is with elections, or
for sure. Being a person who doesn't really believe in government, I think elections are just like popularity contests. It's like a poll to see where people, it's like gauging, all right, where's everyone shifting politically? Where are they right now? Especially the swing voters, and saying, well, the general public, what do they think? And can you kind of, if you want to do anything political, can you play off that? It's just information, just data.
Exactly. And that's why I think, among other reasons, why I think it's so crucial that the formerly known as the Liberal Democrats changed the party name to the Libertarian Party, because the only thing that really matters at these elections, other than potentially getting someone maybe elected to have this podium to be able to share the ideas, the only thing that really matters is we need to figure out how popular libertarianism is. Because if we have any chance of getting some sort of libertarian future going, we need to convert a huge amount of people to libertarianism. So, having a party literally called the Libertarian Party is a great way to gauge, okay, hey, we have 2.5% of the population. Maybe, what's the messaging? How can we improve the messaging? Like, there's that advantage to elections.
It's like, how are we going to wake people up to the ideas, and then make actual change through people, not necessarily the populism, but just through use of a better term, human action, to do things.
Exactly. Right. So we'll segue to the other thing I wanted to talk about, which is looking away from Australian politics, where again, there's not really been any huge bombshells and things happening, to US politics, where there's always
the fun part.
the fun part of the bombastic, politics of excess of the US, where there's always a million things happening. There seems to be a new development in the new lows that they can find every other week. And the most recent one, let's go to the video clip for this one. So,
all right, sweet as.
We begin with that thunderbolt of a ruling from the Colorado State Supreme Court, saying in no uncertain terms the disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president is constitutionally disqualified from being on the ballot for the Republican primary in that state. The ruling clocks in at over 200 pages, and it pulls no punches, starting with what they had to say about Trump's role on January 6th. Quote, President Trump incited and encouraged the use of violence and lawless action to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. The tenor of President Trump's messages to his supporters in exhorting them to travel to Washington, D.C. on January 6th was obvious and unmistakable. The allegedly rigged election was an act of war, and those victimized by it had an obligation to fight back and to fight aggressively. And President Trump's supporters did not miss or misunderstand the message. The cavalry was coming to fight. That part of the ruling upheld a lower court's finding.
All right, so that's the general gist of the story, which is that Donald Trump, it's been in question for a long time now whether he's going to be allowed to run. He's clearly the most popular of the Republican primary candidates, and probably far more popular than Biden, as in the head-to-head. But the question is whether he'll be allowed to run by the powers that be. They've thrown all the charges for January 6th of 3 years ago at him just before the campaign trail. And there's now, so the state of Colorado, their Supreme Court has brought down a ruling that says that Trump cannot be on the ballot, which is a huge development. I also thought it was quite funny looking at that clip. Now, for those who just listen and don't view, you wouldn't have been able to see it, but the smirk of satisfaction on that newsreader's face as she goes through that story, and she's
the intro thrilled. Where it's like, I'm just throwing shots at Trump right now. Like, that was far out.
She's just thrilled that this is all going down, and that she gets to talk about the fact that I mean, you can't call it, I don't think you can call it anything other than democracy being subverted. Obviously, if you listen to the Democrat line, it's that they're doing all of this to save democracy. You're not allowed to vote for who you want to vote for because we're saving democracy. But again, I think both sides kind of make this play at the idea of democracy being good and holy. And I think both of us, I'd imagine you as well, but I don't put a whole lot of stock in the morality of democracy, mob rule on a massive scale. What are your thoughts on that before we go into anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole idea of it being a protection and a safeguard, I could see it from like a mainstream point of view, because you're arguing that he's a criminal and he's an evil person. It's like, we're not going to let Chapo Guzman on the electoral under the electoral roll on the ballot because he's an evil drug dealer. This man's the same. I'm sorry, allegedly drug dealer. He's a evil man, and we're saving the people. But I don't know how many people are buying this. How many people are saying, like, I could imagine, the Trump, no Trump at all costs people. I'm sure they're buying it all down. But how many people are saying, like, okay, like, yeah, let's not let him on the ballot. This is a good choice.
Well, I think the question is not how many people are buying this, because I think it's abundantly clear that the Never Trumpers are going to buy all of it. And the pro-Trumpers, nothing's gonna, the super diehard pro-Trumpers, nothing's gonna change their mind.
Ultra MAGA.
Yeah, the ultra MAGA. But it seems that with every one of these new attacks at him, where they arrested him, they all of they what's it called? They had the warrant to break into Mar-a-Lago. Yeah. All of these only serve to increase his popularity, both in Republican primaries and in like the head-to-head polls. So there's no question that all of this stuff just cements in people the idea that, okay, the establishment hates Trump, therefore Trump must be my candidate to fight against the establishment. And there seems to be a huge appetite for this in the US. I think the real question is, will they be able to actually stop him from running? That seems to be the play right now.
Yeah.
That they've kind of gone too far now. They have to find a way to actually stop him from running. I think this thing with Colorado was kind of a testing the water type of situation, where like if they find now that, well, because Trump's appealed to the federal Supreme Court to overrule this, if it holds, for example, every other state that wants to get rid of Trump off the ballot has, carte blanche to go and do that now. If it doesn't hold, well, then it was just Colorado tried this thing and we'll forget about it by the next news cycle and they'll try something else. But it does seem to be that there is this, that's the move now. I don't know if they're going to be able to get rid of Biden. That might be the other strategy. Somehow not have Biden be the candidate running against Trump and have it be a Newsom or something. But if the kind of two strategies going at the same time, I don't know if what they're actually doing to get rid of Biden. But the attack strategy certainly seems to be, what can we do now to stop Trump from running, because we can't make him unpopular through these methods.
Well, the thing I'm wondering, though, is with the US and their elections, you've got the electoral college that essentially from each state gives a vote for the president to be elected. Can in Colorado they say, all right, does it have to be partisan? Because maybe I'm thinking in an Australian term where it's partisan, does it have to be individual? So can they say, all right, we're going to run Vivek as the Republican candidate in Colorado. So can they vote and they'll still get electors into the Electoral College? Or is it just going to be Trump is federally or nationally, whatever the term they use, the person to run for president, therefore he's totally excluded?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how the mechanism works, but I think the Republicans can only run one candidate, right?
Okay.
That's why the whole point of the primaries. You can't have Trump in 49 states, but Vivek in the one that he's not allowed to run in. It's Trump is the candidate. If that were the case, Trump would get 0 of the votes for Colorado. And I mean, Vivek would probably have to run as an independent. I don't think that.
Do you think these Trump voters are just going to go to like RFK? RFK gets Colorado, then that's just dud electors going to the Electoral College. You know, I mean, it could be something that totally backfires where the Democrats don't get anything.
I think, yeah. Look, I think the what has to happen for it to stick is not just Colorado goes, because the way it works in the elections is that whoever wins the state, except for there's a couple of states where they do it slightly differently, where you get a proportion of your vote. Yeah. But in most of the states, whoever wins the states gets all the points for that state. So Colorado turning blue, I'm not sure where Colorado was last year, but Colorado being blue, it's a swing state. Okay, there you go. So it is important, but Colorado being blue is not an election losing move in and of itself. It's not like, you lost this whole state and therefore you can't make it up. Well, he can easily make it up somewhere else. The question is, if 5 more swing states especially make the same ruling, then it becomes mathematically impossible to win with the Electoral College. So I think the game they're playing it's not something that will actually play out on the election day. It's something that is playing out to see what it is that comes out of the election day.
It's to get the ripple effect. So essentially this transfers onto California, which transfers onto Oregon, which transfers to New York. So you've totally barred Trump, and it's like, oh, sorry, he's the nominee.
You can't win. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. You can either vote for Trump or you can either vote for Biden or whoever the Democrat is. And in your states where there's no Trump, you have the Libertarian candidate, whoever that may be, the Greens candidate, and RFK. And that's and on the Electoral College, it won't even look any different. It'll just all of these states will be blue because there was no option for them to be red. I think that's I think also they're kind of trying to push the hand of the Republican Party a little bit, because if they have a Trump as their candidate who literally cannot win mathematically before a single vote is cast, well, then they're going to have to do something major to shift that. And I don't know what Trump does. Imagine Trump going into an election that he knows he can't win. The last election, he didn't accept the loss and called it rigged. And there are certainly there is certainly an argument to be made for ways that election was rigged, whether it was literally with the machines, which is less substantive. But the fact that that the Hunter Biden laptop story was suppressed on all social media and media just a week before the election is rigging. So I mean, if you can imagine how he would accept a rigging on this scale if he were to be the Republican candidate and couldn't win before a vote was cast. I don't know what you have. I don't know what happens. Maybe we finally get that civil war that Tim Pool's been talking about for so long.
Well, I like the idea of this isn't going to just make Trump go away. He's going to be he's just going to let him serve his second term, so you get him out of the way and you get whatever, you get your bloody what's her name? The person who was actually, I found out she's actually Indian. So that whole thing I said last time, Nikki Haley, she's actually Indian. So I found out that she wouldn't actually be racist against Vivek because she's actually got Indian heritage, which is funny. So I'll correct myself there officially. But yeah, I mean, get him out of the way, let him serve his second term. Whatever's going to happen, I think it's going to be just like the first term, where you're going to get people hate him. He's not going to really do a lot, and he walks away, and then you can go and get your next fucking president in. I mean,
and so to that point, I wanted to read you a tweet by Spike Cohen. So Spike, we've had on the show. Spike's come to Australia. He's a good friend of the libertarian community here in Australia. So I think his opinion is always valid, and he always kind of looks at things through a slightly different lens to maybe what we look at things as.
And has great tweets as well. Follow him. He just has some fire going on.
Yes, he does. Yeah. So this is his take on that whole situation. He says, people keep wondering who the regime will switch out Biden for, since he's trailing in the polls and on his last legs. Will it be Kamala, Newsom, Michelle Obama? Well, I'll tell you. It'll be Trump. The CO, so the Colorado court's decision, will be overruled by the Supreme Court. Trump will be on every ballot. He will continue to lead in the polls, and both Republicans and Democrats will continue to ignore the actual reasons he shouldn't be re-elected. 15 days to slow the spread, $7 trillion of debt in one term, supporting red flag laws, bump stock and suppressor bans, being an absolute lapdog for every single agency, alphabet agency, including the FBI, net increase in taxes and regulation, promising to drain the swamp and increasing the budget and power of every single department. And he goes on, but that's the general idea. And I think that's exactly kind of what you're saying here. It's the move here, like, it is a lot of noise, but at the end of the day, is Trump actually that bad for the establishment? Are they actually unable to control him? Or the only evidence we have to go by, being the last elections, is no, he's not that bad for the establishment. If anything, like what we were saying before about Dan Andrews, he galvanizes the opposition against him. Democrats suck right now. Biden sucks. Inflation sucks. Trump gets in office. Hey, look, Hitler's back in charge of our country. Everyone go vote again. So there is that. Agreed?
For sure. Yeah, no, definitely. We'll see what happens, but yeah, I think it's just going to be the same kind of lame duck. So yeah, I'm with you, Spike. I'm glad we kind of teed up on something. Get at me, bro.
Yeah. So look, the other possibility, which I think, sorry, Spike does go on in the comments, and he says two possible alternatives are Trump is kicked off kicked off of a sufficient number of ballots and Biden wins by default, which we talked about that possibility. Trump is convicted and imprisoned, and voters elect whomever the GOP gives them in righteous anger. I'm assuming he's talking about Nikki Haley here. He says, either way, the uniparty regime wins. I think there's one correction I want to make there, and maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm too hopeful. Maybe I'm too glass half full about this whole situation.
I'm glad you are.
I put a lot of stock into Vivek Ramaswami. I know he's not a libertarian. He says he was a libertarian, interestingly. I don't know too many former libertarians. Generally, once you become one, you don't leave. But he certainly has a lot of leanings that way. He's a bit hawkish on a couple of things, especially the southern border, a little bit on Israel, in continuing to support, I suppose, not adding new support, but kind of honoring the commitments that we've made thus far, that they've made thus far. But barring like those two, I think he's appeared on a lot of podcasts with libertarians, including the Ron Paul Liberty Report, where Ron Paul asked him about like the Fed and all this sort of stuff. And he was good. He was good on a lot of that stuff. And he was good on a lot of the anti-war broadly stuff and the anti-corruption stuff. And there is the possibility that should Trump get convicted and imprisoned or kicked off from so many ballots that he literally cannot be the Republican nominee, I think a lot of his voter base doesn't default to DeSantis or to Nikki Haley. I think it defaults to Ramaswamy. And the current polls don't show that Ramaswamy would be the second, because all of the votes that would go to Ramaswamy are currently within the Trump numbers.
Exactly. He'll just say, I'm following Trump's legacy, and so it'll just go to him.
And that's all he's done, like the whole way through the debates, is he's positioned himself as the Trump successor, to the point of he hasn't attacked Trump on any of the number of things that he obviously thinks, because like the way he attacks the others, he's very nitpicky about doing the wrong thing and doing incorrect things. He's very strategic, very intelligent. He hasn't attacked Trump on the myriad of things that you could attack Trump on, such as anything that Spike has just talked about. I guarantee you that Ramaswamy is not in favor of any of those things, least of all the three-letter agencies, which he's railed against a number of times. The reason he hasn't attacked Trump on that is because he's positioned himself to be the funnel to accept all of Trump's votes, should Trump not be allowed to run. So I think there is that possible outcome of all of this, which hasn't been considered, which I don't think is a bad outcome. I think that is the best of. I think that's better than Trump being allowed to run.
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
having
For
Vivek
sure.
as the default Republican nominee is better than having Trump by a long shot.
I think he's just good because he has gone on all those independent podcasts, and he has had those long form interviews, whereas you haven't really seen that with Trump. You haven't really seen that with any of them else. And like the thing about a long form interview is it's really hard to have a facade unless you're a really good liar to kind of maintain that all. And he's been straight up on everything, and he hasn't really floundered on any issues. So I think he's the real deal. Whether or not the GOP might let him in, we'll see about that. But at least they don't have like super delegates like the Democrats do. So Trump goes, he'll probably be the one in, and it'll just be Trump 2.0. But 2.0 is always an upgrade.
Yeah. And who knows? In 3 years' time, we might be seeing Prime Minister of Australia Dan Andrews shaking hands with President Ramaswami. And it would be worth it just to hear what Ramaswami has to say about what a piece of shit Dan Andrews is after meeting him. It would be worth it just for that.
Actually, I want Dan, if say like Trump gets in, I want Dan Andrews to be Prime Minister just so he has to kind of like curtail to Trump. That'd be worth it all.
And if any of that happens, you heard it here first on Collectivitis podcast. All right, let's wrap it up there for the day.
Sure.
As we mentioned at the start, if you don't already follow us on all of the things, leave us a comment, leave us a review, leave us a like. We're on Spotify, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Other than that, we will catch you next time.
Take it easy.